Thanks, Kelly. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Michael Staub with Innovative Arc Strategies, and I'm here with my partner, Greg Madsen. And we wanted to spend the next hour talking about rebates. We wanted to talk about rebates because we have really kind of seen some interesting things which have occurred in the last year or so with respect to PBMs and how they're treating rebates, what they're including, what they're not including. And there's also been some changes that have that could be taking place based upon regulatory considerations in Washington, D.C. by the Office of Management Budget and Health and Human Services. So we kind of wanted to cover the waterfront here in terms of what is going on in the world of rebates, because I know it's rather confusing. And to give you a little bit about where we're coming from, both Greg and I are former execs at CVS Caremark, and I'm a healthcare attorney and was the Vice President of Legal Services and Managing Counsel at CVS Caremark for about almost 6 years. So have had a lot of experience in terms of rebate contracts and negotiating client contracts with respect to rebates and what we try to do for our clients. And I'll let Greg tell you a little bit about his background as well. So.
Hi, everyone. This is Greg Madsen. I'm the other co-founder of Innovative Arc Strategies here with Michael, and I'm a registered pharmacist. So I've been in the PBM industry since about 1990, so quite a while. Prior to that, I was a Walgreens pharmacist. So, but prior to Michael and I starting Innovative Arc Strategies, I was the Senior Vice President of Retail Services at CVS Caremark. So I was responsible for the retail pharmacy contracts, kind of the pharmacy operations, making sure all the claims processed correctly. I also kind of managed the spread, so the MAC programs, all those kind of things that happen. Sat on the underwriting calls, kind of decide what kind of pricing we're going to offer clients. So, so Michael and I kind of bring a inside PBM perspective on kind of what's going on with regard to discounts and rebates in particular that we're going to talk about today. So hopefully this will be informational for everyone. Kelly, could you launch the first poll question for us? So this question really is, which is more important to receive from your PBM, right? Are you interested in getting better pricing discounts, on your brands and generics and things, or higher rebates, or maybe none of the above? Yeah, so everybody's really interested in, it looks like, higher rebates and stuff.
No, higher discounts.
I mean, higher discounts, and which really makes a lot more sense. So when we start thinking about, so really then, kind of what is a rebate, right? When you think about, rebates are really just a form of discounting, and people have the perception that rebates are kind of something that's exclusive to the PBM industry and drug manufacturers, when in reality that's not true. Lots and lots of industries provide rebates to the purchaser of their services in exchange for market share, right? If you use a certain trucking company enough, they'll rebate you back a portion of your fees. If you buy cereal in a grocery store, right, the grocery store gets a rebate from the manufacturer, in exchange for that market share movement that they get. So it's not something that's really exclusive only to the drug manufacturers and PBMs in the world. But the problem with the rebates in the pharmacy benefit arena is that clients, payers see them, right? They get something that gets passed on to them, and so they really got to be comes front and center to a lot of places on kind of what's going on. But pharma really provides, these financial rebates based on increased market share, right? So there's kind of a couple of different sorts of rebates, whether or not it's, just to be on the formulary, or, if you move market share, you can get rebates, and there's a few others as well that we'll discuss in a little while. But they really only pay rebates on what's considered a single source brand drug, meaning a brand drug that doesn't have a generic available for it yet. Once the generic comes to market, the drug manufacturer stops paying rebates on their brand name drug because of that additional competition that happens out there. But usually the competition, for these drugs are within a therapeutic class. For example, we give an example of some insulins, right, that are coming through. Whether or not you're doing your Humalog as your preferred insulin or Novolog as your preferred insulin, right? The drug manufacturers, Lilly or Novo Nordisk, will pay a rebate based on your ability to drive market share to their product. And that's why you get these tier placements, right? Because I'm sure most of you are on probably a 3-tier copay structure where you have generic copay, you have preferred brand copay, and a non-preferred brand copay. And typically the difference between the preferred and the non-preferred copay has to be at least $15, right? That's kind of the threshold that the drug manufacturers feel that that's enough incentive to get a patient member to take the preferred drug, and it's kind of a penalty to take the non-preferred drug. So that's kind of but drug manufacturers, so they pay the rebates on the single source brands only, but one thing you got to always think about is that a lot of times you're getting a rebate on a per brand claim basis, right? And that's something you got to think about. What's in your contract? Does your contract with your PBM pay you a rebate even on a multi-source brand? Or do you only get a rebate on a formulary brand that's a preferred product, right? Those are kind of things to think about to make sure that you're maximizing the value of the rebates that you're earning.
I wanted to just spend a couple minutes talking about what's called the Pharmacy and Therapeutic Committee, or P&T Committee, is better known for drugs and how they actually get on a PBM's formulary. Because I think it's important to have a little bit of understanding about how this drug that may be on your formulary is actually getting there. And every PBM has some type of a P&T Committee process that involves inclusion of prescription drugs on that PBM's formulary. When I was at Caremark, I was the legal representative on the P&T process, but the primary members on the P&T Committee include doctors who represent different fields of medicine. They include pharmacists that as well, and so you can have many people on this P&T Committee, which basically their primary consideration is to consider the safety and efficacy of a drug before it is included in the PBM's formulary. So if there's a new to market drug, and particularly now where you have a lot of specialty products that are coming out, but it used to be like for a lot of brand drugs that were used to treat just the normal everyday disease state, those drugs would go in front of a P&T Committee, and there would be discussions and debates and review of literature to decide whether or not a PBM should include that particular drug on the formulary. And physicians may have different opinions based upon their experience with the drug, with other drugs, or research that they may have done. But it's a pretty interesting process that a drug has to go through in terms of a review process before it is actually included on the P&T on the PBM's formulary, because they actually vote to decide whether or not that is included. Once the P&T Committee actually approves the addition of the drug to the PBM's formulary, what happens then is that the trade group or the whoever within the PBM negotiates the rebate contracts will then, once the approval of the P&T Committee is received, will then go out and try to negotiate a rebate contract with the pharmaceutical manufacturer. So there may be different brand drugs within a category or class. As we mentioned on the previous slide about it could be Humulin and Novolog or Humalog or whatever for Lilly and Novo Nordisk. But what they did, once the drug has been approved by the P&T Committee, it then goes to this trade group who then goes out and negotiates with pharma a rebate contract. And what they're trying to do is, it's trying to derive the best value that they can for that particular drug. So typically the P&T Committee does not take cost into consideration when they approve the drug. They're primarily looking at the safety and efficacy of the drug. But even with the advent of formulary exclusions, they have to look at the safety and efficacy of those drugs. But once they're approved by the P&T Committee, the trade people that will then go out and try to negotiate the best rebate that they can for their clients or for the PBM. So the next slide is really it's the definition of rebates. it'd be interesting for all of you to kind of go back and look at the definition of rebate that you have in your contract, because every PBM has a different definition of what a rebate is. Depending upon whether they actually hold the manufacturer contracts, or as Greg will talk a little bit here, if your PBM uses an aggregator, that definition of rebate is critical. I mean, understanding what that definition includes or does not include. And I think that from a legal standpoint, from where I sit, I think the most important thing is you want to try to have as broad or as all-encompassing of a definition of a rebate that you can get, or that you can negotiate as a part of your PBM contract. And what I try to do here is include kind of a general definition of rebate that we use, because again, when Greg and I are negotiating PBM contracts on behalf of our clients, when we take them out to bid through an RFP process, what we do is we think in terms of not just a rebate, but what we consider to be what is manufacturer-derived revenue, or what revenue does the pharmaceutical manufacturer derive based upon a particular client's utilization. And I think that's how you have to look at this, is what is the revenue that's being generated for that pharmaceutical manufacturer based upon the drugs that my members are taking. So the kind of a general definition, all-encompassing definition that I have here is that for a definition of rebate is any discount, price concession, or other direct or indirect remuneration a PBM receives from a pharmaceutical manufacturer under a rebate contract that is contingent upon and related directly or attributable to a member's use of a prescription drug that is on the PBM's formulary and collected and received by a PBM from a pharmaceutical manufacturer. That's a pretty broad definition, and the reason you want that is because you want to certainly open up the discussion about what rebates are, am I entitled to receive as an employer, as a payer, for your members. So just an example here, I've listed some examples of what are considered manufacturer-derived revenue. As Greg mentioned earlier in the presentation, formulary rebates. If the PBM places that particular pharmaceutical manufacturer's drug on their formulary, they get a formulary rebate. Based upon the size of the PBM and the size of, if they can drive market share, they're going to get more rebates based upon the utilization of that particular pharmaceutical product by that PBM's by their clients. The other one that I think that sometimes gets overlooked, and sometimes people don't ask for it, sometimes they do, are really the price protection and inflation protection rebates. And these are rebates that PBM started paying a few years ago when a lot of clients were complaining about the inflationary costs of pharmaceutical products and prescription drugs, and the PBMs went out and started negotiating sort of a kind of a floor where if the AWP of a particular drug exceeded a certain negotiated amount, that the pharmaceutical manufacturer would then pay the PBM a rebate to make up the differences between wherever the floor is that they negotiated and where the inflation went. So that kind of went back to the client. Sometimes it went back in terms of a per claim inflationary protection rebate, or sometimes it got the full value of the inflation. The other thing that is interesting is, because again, are the administrative fees a PBM receives from pharma for administering a prescription drug program. So, in your PBM contract, particularly for those of you that use one of the bigger PBMs that have their own rebate contracts, there is usually a provision in your contract that says, hey, look, we get admin fees, from pharma to administer this rebate program by collecting the information from our clients, sending it into pharma for collecting the rebates, and so they do get money. Now the question is whether or not your PBM is willing to give you a portion of that, any of it, all of it. Again, it depends upon the size of the client and how much what you're able to negotiate. But there is quite a bit of money in admin fees that PBMs make from pharmaceutical manufacturer contracts. The next two are interesting because, again, I think sometimes people are just, they're not aware of different ways that PBMs can make money through pharma. And one of them is through physician detailing fees that pharmaceutical manufacturers will pay. So, a lot of times a PBM may call up a physician and say, hey, look, this is the preferred product. or in their app or whatever what they're trying to do is trying to get physicians basically to use those particular brand drugs that are on the PBM's formulary. And pharma also pays PBMs to make sure that their members remain compliant. If you think about it, if a particular brand drug is on the PBM's formulary, the pharmaceutical manufacturer wants the PBM to make sure the member is taking their drug. So they're also getting formulary compliance fees or member compliance fees. So these are kind of just some areas that you need to be aware of. And there's certainly more than what we've listed here in terms of what pharma pays to PBMs to include a drug on their formulary.
So when you think about those rebates and manufacturer-derived revenue, there's one thing you'll start to see in your PBM contracts is that they're excluding certain types of products from rebates, right? And so some examples of these exclusions, typically what you'll see in there is exclusions that have to do with 340B claims, right? Because clearly if they're getting, the drug manufacturer is selling it at a 340B price, they're not going to pay a rebate on top of that as well. But a lot of times it's 100% member paid or cash card programs, right? Drug manufacturers don't pay rebates on cash card programs because there's no ability to really move market share at all. Member submitted claims, so if member paid cash for it, submitted it in, they don't pay a rebate on those things. Claims that are filled from an in-house or on-site pharmacy sometimes are excluded, or claims that are submitted in but they're older than 180 days, 6 months old, right? They just say I don't pay rebates on those. Over-the-counter products, things that you can purchase without a prescription, a lot of times they'll say these are excluded from a rebate piece. Biosimilars, so in the specialty world, right, there's starting to become more and more biosimilars, which are brand name drugs, right? They're not generics, they're brands. But, since it's kind of an unknown right now for a lot of the PBMs, they don't know what kind of rebates they're going to get from them. They want to initially exclude those from any rebates, even though they may very well earn rebates on them. And then really the last one on here is these limited distribution drugs or exclusive specialty drugs. So there are a number of specialty drugs that the drug manufacturers limit which specialty pharmacies can actually dispense them. So they really kind of control that. But the thing is that there's probably 20 or 30 different specialty pharmacies that get access to these drugs. They just don't want them filled at your local retail pharmacy, right, an independent or a Walgreens or something like that. They don't want them filled there because there's some reporting that's got to be done on them. A lot of these specialty drugs have some pretty serious side effects. So the drug manufacturers want to know who's getting them and some reporting back on them, and so they control who distributes them. But a lot of times your PBM is going to say, well, if it is this limited distribution thing, we want to exclude it, and you want to make sure that that doesn't happen, right? If you're using your PBM is using a specialty pharmacy that has access to these drugs, then you should get a rebate on them. Now, if your specialty pharmacy doesn't have access to it and they got to go purchase it from somebody else, then I can see not getting a rebate on it. But otherwise, these limited distribution, exclusive distribution drugs, if your PBM's specialty pharmacy has access to them, you should be getting a rebate. Now, with regard to the OTCs, though, right, test strips are considered over-the-counter products. Right, test strips and Lancets are over-the-counter, but the challenge you get is that they're also on the formulary for the PBM. Usually you got to use a certain test strip that goes along with the meter. They'll give you the meter for free, but you got to use their test strips. So the argument is, why are you excluding the rebates on those test strips when you're required to use them to have a covered benefit, right? So those things are something that you got to make sure you discuss with your PBM to make sure that you're getting the rebates that they earn on those test strips. But then, so the key really is going to be, I think, in the modern world, what's going on these days is the specialty drug rebates are getting tremendous, right? There's just a lot of, because there's so much competition amongst, think about all the rheumatoid arthritis drugs that are out there. There's 6 or 8 different drugs that are out there. The rebates on those drugs are getting pretty significant. So you really got to understand what is considered on, those specialty drugs that are going to be on the formulary and included in the rebate piece, right? You don't want them to be limited distribution and for them to say, well, they're not covered under your piece, right? That's really a key thing you got to think about.
Yeah, and let me just make a couple points on the biosimilars and the limited distribution products, because these are really, I think, really key areas, and which really kind of in the last year, particularly as we've been doing, finalist meetings and RFPs, have really kind of noticed a real shift in terms of what PBMs are trying to do on these two areas. For example, as most of you probably have read in the last week, the FDA has now approved a biosimilar for Humira. And some of you on the webinar may have heard Greg and I give a presentation at one of the UCS conferences on specialty drugs. But to Greg's point, the biosimilars are brands. And so our expectation is that more and more biosimilars are introduced to the market, that the biosimilar manufacturer is probably going to have to pay rebates. There may be a little bit of a price break on a biosimilar versus a brand specialty drug, but not of enough where without having a rebate that the biosimilar manufacturer is not going to be able to drive market share. So I think that you have to anticipate that there will be significant rebates for biosimilars. And, the question is, and as Greg noted, PBMs are trying to exclude biosimilars from the rebate guarantees that they're giving a client because, one, they don't know what will happen, and two, sometimes I think they just see an opportunity to make more money to increase their profitability. So the question is even if they're not paying it, they're trying to exclude it from what we call a minimum rebate guarantee or whatever you have. But if you're getting 100% pass-through of rebates from a PBM, or even if you're not, you should ask them to at least make sure that you are getting the biosimilar rebate that they get, because that's the only way that you're going to make sure that you're getting the rebate on the biosimilar. On the limited distribution drugs and exclusive distribution drugs, what we have started to do is now define what a limited distribution product is. The reality is a few years ago, limited distribution drugs were not even on the radar screen. It was like, oh yeah, not a big deal. But what has happened is that the specialty drug manufacturers are limiting these to really the big players. Accredo for ESI, Caremark, Briova for Optum, Walgreens. And those are the big, players, and they're limiting. They're saying only these entities can distribute these products because they've got the clinical programs and the expertise, blah blah blah, and so we're limiting that. Well, if you ask your PBM for a copy of their limited distribution product list, it's amazing how many drugs are on that list, and a lot of them are commonly used specialty drugs. And if those commonly used specialty drugs are excluded from rebates, then you're not going to get anything. So you have to understand, you have to start defining what is a limited distribution or exclusive distribution product, and find out what does that include, what is included on your PBM specialty drug list that's limited or not limited. I mean, it has changed a lot. It's just something that, again, as a purchaser of benefits, you have to know what you're buying, and you have to know what's included or what's being excluded.
So Kelly, can you put up the poll number 2? So this poll question really is, does your PBM use a rebate aggregator? Yes, no, don't know. Right, that's kind of something we want to talk about here, but interesting to see. Do you know, does your PBM use a rebate aggregator? Yeah, right, so it's kind of unknown, right? That's kind of a mystery that kind of happens. Okay, thanks, Kelly. So really, what is a rebate aggregator, right? So a rebate aggregator is kind of a middleman to a middleman. What happens in a lot of cases, is the mid-size and the boutique PBMs don't have enough market share and volume, claims volume, to negotiate directly with drug manufacturers for rebates. So what they do is they contract with a larger PBM. A lot of times it's Caremark or Express Scripts or Optum, and maybe there's a few other aggregators as well, to actually submit their claims on their behalf to the drug manufacturers. So they kind of include them with the bigger PBM's claims volume and submit in, thinking they're going to get access then to the larger PBM's rebates, right? So theoretically, right, you're thinking the larger PBMs can negotiate the best rebates out in the market with the drug manufacturers because of the volume they're able to drive. So the smaller, mid-sized, boutique kind of PBMs shift their claims off to the larger PBMs to contract with them, and they submit them in. Well, the perception is, right, that, these larger PBMs are going to submit the claims in, but they only pay back to the smaller, mid-sized PBMs a portion of what they actually receive in rebates. Now, if you're with one of the, the mid-sized, smaller PBMs, they may be telling you that you're getting 100% of rebates, but that's really a misnomer. You're getting 100% of what they're able to negotiate with the bigger PBM or the aggregator, not really 100% of what those claims earned. The actual aggregator is going to keep a big chunk of those dollars, right? Because it's their contracts, and they're doing a service on your behalf. So, that's something you really got to think about. You may be getting on a transparent pass-through basis. Your PBM's telling you you're getting 100% of the rebates, but you're really only getting 100% of what they're able to negotiate with the aggregator, not truly 100% of what's going on. So that's something to take, to think about, and actually ask your PBM, right? Do you use a rebate aggregator? Because if they do, most likely you're kind of leaving money on the table because you're only able to get access, like I said, to what they're able to do.
Yeah, it was interesting. I had a call with a president of a kind of a boutique mid-sized PBM the other day because there was a question that came up as we were negotiating a client contract about what was actually included in the rebates that they were getting. And again, it's interesting because I've had this discussion before, but the problem is the smaller or boutique PBMs that use an aggregator don't really even know what they're getting, which is, you would think, surprising, but it's if you're, and the problem is if you're using an aggregator, it's not very likely you're ever going to get an opportunity to go ahead and see the formulary management agreement that's negotiated between the PBM and the boutique size PBM. They're just not going to show it to you. And part of it is, I think, that unfortunately the smaller boutique size PBMs that are using aggregators are really kind of at the mercy of the larger PBM to say, hey, this is what you're getting. This is what I'm giving you, without really knowing, what it is that they're getting back. And, so I think that, in this one situation, it kind of came up in the area of OTCs that related to, diabetic test strips or, things like that. So again, I think that it's important to ask your PBM, and particularly if it's not one of the bigger PBMs, about, well, when you're saying I'm getting pass-through, what have you negotiated? Does that just include formulary market share? Does that include admin fees that somebody is getting? Does it include physician detailing, price protection? Again, you're just trying to educate yourself in terms of what you're actually your expectation is. And the reality is, as Greg said, is that the value of the PBMs that come through an aggregator are much less than you're going to get from a bigger PBM. It's just the way it is. And in fact, now you have aggregators to aggregators. I mean, it's just, they're trying to take the best of both worlds in terms of trying to, offer, rebates to boutique and small size PBMs, because it's a very competitive business. We understand that. But it is just something that to be aware of in terms of what you're actually receiving or getting in terms of the rebates.
Kelly, could you put up poll question number 3 for us? So when it comes to rebates, what kind of rebates do you actually receive from your PBM? Are you getting kind of a flat dollar per brand claim rebate, a fixed dollar rebate from them? Are you getting 100% pass-through of rebates? Whatever there is, they pass that through. Are you getting maybe some sort of minimum rebate guarantee with 100% or some pass-through if it's better than that minimum? Or are you getting point-of-sale rebates? Are you getting rebates that have been reinvested into your brand discounts, and so you're getting the value of that rebate at the point of service, when the prescription's being filled? Or do you get no rebates at all? Yeah, so it looks like, okay, yeah, so some flat dollar, a lot of you are getting a percentage, you come in through 100%, but a lot of you are getting minimums with 100%, so that's great, thanks. So when you think about point of sale rebates, what we're really talking about here are the PBMs will come to you and say, we'll take the value of the rebates that we're expecting to get on the brand name claims, and we'll invest those rebates into the brand discounts, either at retail or at mail or at specialty. So your brand discounts get more aggressive, right? Instead of getting, say, AWP minus 16% on your brands at retail, maybe you get AWP minus 20%, right? They take and they reinvest the value of that rebate into the discount, so you get the value of it right at the point of sale. Right when that prescription's being filled, you get the value of that whole thing. Now there's a couple of pros and cons to that whole scenario, right? If you have members that are on kind of a flat dollar copay, right? They have a $25 brand copay or a $50 brand copay type thing at mail order or whatever, and the rebate, the value of that rebate has been factored into it. If you have flat dollar rebates, the client, you the payer, still gets the value of that all up front. The member just pays their copay and they don't really get an advantage by getting a piece of that. But if they're on a percentage, say they're on a 20% copay, well then they are taking advantage of it. They're going to share in a piece of that rebate, and so that's something you got to think about when you're doing POS, right? If you have someone that's got either a front-end deductible, a co-insurance, or some sort of model, and you're reinvesting the value of the rebate into those discounts, into the brand discounts, you're actually sharing that rebate then with your members as they pay for their prescription claims. But one thing you think about when you have to have a point-of-sale rebate, when they've reinvested them back into things, since they're kind of giving you the value of that money up front, you don't get the full value of the rebates, right? There's a time value of money that they take into account on that. They factor in something slightly less than what they think they're going to earn to make sure that they're not giving you a better rebate than what they actually are going to collect from their things. So usually there's some sort of holdback. It could be 4 to 5% of the rebates, the actual rebates earned, are withheld then by the PBM, held back, either kept by them because they're giving you the money up front, or not. But that's something to think about, right? And you always want to try to see, if you are doing point-of-sale rebates, can you get a true-up at the end of the year? So say they're giving you the rebates and the discounts. At the end of the year, you want to kind of negotiate a true-up that says, all right, I've gotten the rebates up front of my brand discounts, but at the end of the year, did I really get the full value of those rebates, or there's still money that I should receive back, right? That's something that you got to try to negotiate with your PBMs to take advantage of that. So there's a lot of nice upside to get point-of-sale rebates. You get the value of those rebates up front. Typically, though, it's kind of a standard across the board, right? The PBM is going to know roughly how much rebates they're going to get on brands, and they factor that in across the board for all the brands that are going through at retail or mail or specialty, as opposed to each individual drug getting its actual rebate amount collected on it. So that's, there's some withholds, and if you ever have a PBM that's telling you they're doing a transparent scenario, but they actually give you point-of-sale rebates, they've just kind of converted you to a spread model because, right, they're going to give you a fixed discount and not a variable discount anymore because they've baked in the value of the rebates, and typically they're going to keep any upside on those rebates.
Yeah, just an observation on the point-of-sale rebates. I think, earlier this year there was some buzz because, United Healthcare and Aetna were, because of, a lot of bad press or publicity about rebates and the value of rebates, and so both Aetna and some of the other health plans said, oh well, we'll just we'll share those rebates with the member, because everybody was saying, well, it's just the cost of prescription drugs are too high for the person buying the drug or purchasing the drug, and so they started doing this point of sale rebate. But to Greg's point, if you have a percentage copay, it's not necessarily a good thing, because what you're doing is you're actually increasing the plan cost because you're sharing the value of those rebates. So I think that, while there was an initial buzz about POS rebates with health plans, that's kind of died down. I mean, I think that a lot of people said, well, sounds great, but for the member, but may not so great for the plan. So you do see it somewhat from a TPA market standpoint. Some employers or small employers still like to get the point of sale rebates, sometimes not really understanding what it is. The health plans will try to sell as well, and I think that's why there's a lot of interest early this year on point of sale rebates.
Right, because part of the argument on the rebates is even if they're not going to the member necessarily, right, they are being used by the health plan or the employer to lower the premiums, right? They can, if they get a rebate coming back in and they can lower the premiums that are charged out or whatever to the member does get advantage of those rebates. It's just not directly in their discount when they're paying for the prescriptions.
This next slide I think is interesting. I know that when Greg and I were at Caremark, I think consultants and clients, of course, were always trying to figure out, well, how much does the PBM actually make on rebates? It was one of those great mysteries about how much are they actually making and how much are they actually keeping. And so it was interesting for us for being on the inside in terms of really knowing what the pharmaceutical manufacturer rebate contract said and really what the value of those rebates were. And then, a lot of this what we have here on this page is all public information from earnings calls from, the various large PBMs, Caremark and ESI, and to a lesser extent, United Healthcare, in terms of, what they're actually keeping from rebates, because I think that clients, they wonder why their costs keep going up, but the PBM's profits keep going up even more. And a lot of it is in rebates. I mean, that's where a lot of it was. And so, it was interesting in a recent earnings call. Caremark said that in 2017, 30% of it had received rebates on 30% of brand drugs versus 13% in 2011. But it was interesting. They said that this year it will only retain 2% in rebates, but 6-7 years ago they were keeping 27% of the rebates. Express Scripts said that for 2018 is only keeping 5% of rebates. Versus what they were last year, it was 10% and 10 to 20% in 2016. So, part of this you can see the value of the rebates that the PBMs are keeping have actually decreased. A lot of it's just simply competition in the market. I mean, and one of the ways that Caremark, Express Scripts, and Optum have really had to compete is really on rebates. They've had to give up more of those rebates to clients because there's only so much you can do on discounts when it comes to brands and generics in terms of what you can do. So you've seen them have, it's like that balloon. They've now had to give up a little bit more of those rebates to be competitive, which is why you're seeing even more significant dollars in terms of rebates that you can negotiate with a PBM. So recently on the earnings calls, Caremark said that about 5 to 6% of its profits are made up of rebates, and ESI it's about 8%. But it's interesting. There's one of the PBMs said, we'll only keep 2% of the rebates, and again, to me a lot of this is just all marketing. I don't give a lot of this face value to some of these percentages in terms of what they're saying, because it really depends upon the size of the client. I will guarantee you that that FEP, which is the Federal Health Plan, is receiving a lot more in rebates than Joe's Auto Shop here in Chicago. I mean, it's just the way it is. I mean, the bigger you are, it's going to be easier for you to negotiate more of the rebates from the PBM. Even whether it's pass through or on a flat dollar, whatever you're able to negotiate. But again, I think that if your PBM is willing to rep and warrant that they're going to pass through 98% of the rebates back to the client, put it in your contract. I mean, I think that if they're willing to do that, and you can you audit the rebate contracts that the PBM has with pharma, and you get them to rep and warrant to that's actually what they're passing through, because even though you're getting 100% pass through, the question is there can be different rebate contracts, and you just have to kind of be aware of what's going on or what you're actually getting. So
it's really 100% of what, right, or 98% of what, right? So even though you're going to get 100% of rebates passed through, if you're using an aggregator, that may actually be what they're getting. If you're actually contracted with a larger PBM that holds the pharma contracts themselves, being able to audit that and actually go in and look at those contracts to make sure that you're truly getting what they're earning is really important to do.
Yeah, because if you're getting 100% pass-through rebates and the PBM is keeping the admin fees and they're keeping physician detailing and all the other things we talked about, you're not going to get 98%. So that's just the reality. So again, it's important that we go back, and I know we, not to reiterate because it's important, it's to know what is in your rebate pool and when am I getting 100% of what. So that's really important for you to know. So the other thing is there have been a lot of issues or questions raised in the last 12 to 18 months, 6 months about, do rebates contribute to increasing drug costs? I think that there's a lot of people out there that are saying, well, we're paying rebates. One of the reason why pharma pays rebates is, yes, they want to get market share, but these rebates increase the costs of drugs. So if they didn't pay rebates, that means the drug costs would be lower. I think that there's a lot of misinformation out there about, do rebates actually contribute to increasing drug costs? For example, does pharma raise the price of a brand drug to help offset the rebates they are paying to a PBM that ultimately go to you as the client? The other question is if after you get done through the P&T process, and almost every PBM and most clients now are taking the PBM's